I'm going to talk to you to start with about the organic side of things, and then I'm going to move on to the paid side. I thought it was easier to keep the two kind of separate when I'm talking about a topic. I'm going to get a little bit technical on you, so hopefully this won't leave anybody behind too much. Obviously, you can grab me afterwards if you've got any questions, wonder what the hell I was talking about, or how it might affect your particular website. And I'm starting with the real technical SEO in terms of auditing and getting to grips with any issues that you might have. And I'm going to give you a quick demo of one or two problems that actually some people here have with their websites, because obviously I knew who was coming to attend before I started this presentation, so I thought I'd look at one or two delegate websites. So not doing it to offend, just doing it to assist, so no offence intended if you take that. Now, one of the things that we found with technical SEO, we're quite often presented with reports that have been generated by other agencies or by tools that people have accessed, free things that they've seen on the web and thought they'd run their website through the tool. And what they do is produce a massive report, 40, 50 pages long, of 90% bollocks, which has no effect whatsoever on their SEO, whether they do anything with it or not. What it doesn't do is dig deep into the site and understand the real technical issues. And you can only do that if you use multiple tools and your brain. You cannot do it with an automated bit of software alone. The tools can lead you on the path. They can speed up the process. They can maybe find things in seconds that it would take you hours to dig through yourself. But if you don't know what you're looking at, and if you don't know how to put all these different bits of information together, you are not going to get the full picture of any issues you might have with your site. So we use tools like Botify, Systrix, Screaming Frog. We've got obviously Google Search Console and other tools that Google offer around page speed and structured data markup as well. You pull all of that together and you start possibly to find some issues. Now this chart here is actually from Darren's Muscle Food site, and this is traffic from Bing. And as you can probably see, Muscle Food didn't have much traffic from Bing for quite a long time. By much, I mean any. And the reason was, for reasons unknown to anybody and unexplained as yet by their developer, they were blocking BingBot from crawling their site in the robots.txt file. So Bing literally could not access any pages on their site. Nobody knows why, but that was the case. Sometimes it's the simplest things that make a difference. That is worth about £25,000 a month to Muscle Food. Not a terribly large amount when you see the figures that Darren was presenting to you earlier, but if somebody was going to offer me a free £300,000 a year of revenue just by removing one line of text from a file, I would take it. And sometimes you do get the simple wins like that. And sometimes you get the simple kick in the pants. This is a chart from a client, or former client, I should say, analytics. And what we're seeing here, I don't know why I'm pressing spacebars when I've got this, is just there is when their new website was launched. Their new website was built by a company who I won't name, but they are quite familiar in the e-commerce world and might or might not be based in the Northeast and start with a V. And what they did was launch their new website with an infinite scroll. So this is where it loads, say, 12, 15, 18 products onto the page. And as you scroll down the page, you hit a breakpoint and another bunch of 15, 18 products loads underneath. And you can see what happens. This is purely organic traffic. You can see what happened to the organic traffic. It was after that that this company came to us and said, oh, I need help. Da, da, da. So we did a full technical audit. There was no obvious problem in terms of link penalties or pages not being indexed or that kind of stuff. And we said, it's got to be the infinite scroll. It's got to be the infinite scroll. The developers were adamant, no, we've built thousands of sites. We use infinite scroll on loads of those sites. Nobody's having any issues. And eventually, because, as you can see, the organic traffic, it did improve, but it didn't get back to the state that it was. Obviously, the client ran out of patience with us, blamed us, and off they went. But they did leave me with access to their analytics. And a few months later, somebody put a little note in analytics, as you can see just here, little annotation, infinite scroll removed. Look what happened to their organic traffic. But that was our fault, right? So sometimes you have to be firm and clear with developers because they don't always know best. So you do need to be wary of technical issues around the site and how that affects you. I think people tend to get wrapped up in the SEO world. If they think they're losing traffic, they think it's because they're being penalized by Google for something, they've got bad links, it's negative SEO, or they've done something with content and it's duplicate content that's causing an issue, all this kind of stuff. No, sometimes it's a technical underlying issue, and they can be the biggest problems of all. Now, who's here from Denby? Denby was supposed to attend. Chaps there. Okay, excellent. Now, I'm not doing this to poke fun, and I'm not implying any criticism at all, but this is a really, really common issue that we find, and it's a very e-commerce kind of issue, because the majority of e-commerce sites have some kind of pagination, because you have enough products in a category that you don't want to display them all on one page, otherwise it becomes enormous. So you either go for infinite scroll, which has its own problems, as you've seen, or you go for pages, 1, 2, 3, etc. Now, on the Denby website, when you select a second or third or whatever it is page in the sequence, you'll get a URL that looks like this, full of query parameters, setting all the things like the sort order, any kind of filtering that's going on, and setting the page number that you're viewing, which in this case is just clicking onto page number 2. The problem for Google here is not that you've got loads of query parameters and all the rest of it. Google knows how to handle those, and you can control that to some degree with Search Console as well. The problem here is that it's being blocked in the robots.txt file. So Google is being told, never go beyond page 1 of any category on my website. Do not index any of that stuff. Now, I'm not too concerned about Google knowing whether you've got 1, 2, or 72 pages in a sequence. What I am concerned about is Google finding the products on those pages and indexing those individual product pages. So there is a risk, and it doesn't seem to be happening in fairness in this occasion, but there is a real risk, and I've seen this on a lot of sites, where the pages that are listed, or the products that are listed on 2, 3, 4, etc. down the sequence, some of those products don't get indexed because Google's not allowed to get to the page where those links appear. So it never knows that those pages exist. Now, even if you remove that line from your robots.txt file, you have a canonical tag, which is telling Google, ignore any other permutation of this URL and only index the first page in the sequence without any parameters. So even if you get rid of that in your robots.txt file, you still have another issue, which is poor canonicalization, which is telling Google only ever look at one version and ignore all page 2, 3, etc., which again is going to stop it from getting to those products. So these are the kind of things that you need to pick out when you're doing technical audits of sites. They're common e-commerce issues, particularly the canonicalization issue around pagination and such like. And this is the sort of stuff that automated tools won't tell you. You've got to go and dig for this. Okay, Jigsaw 24. Have we got anybody here from Jigsaw 24? Gentleman at the back. Now, you have a slightly different kind of scenario here, although the issue is ultimately the same in terms of indexing. So here we are on the second page of the DSLR category, and you can see there, I've clicked onto the second page, and that generates a URL like this. It's the normal URL, but it's got a hash page equals 1 on the end. And the reason for that is that this is an AJAX-driven website, yeah? So rather than have to load the whole page again, there's code in here which is just swapping out the chunks of the page that are different in order to speed up the loading process, make it a nicer user experience. Perfectly reasonable thing to do. But when, and I'm sorry, Danny, when Google says we can index AJAX, it is lying. It still cannot properly index AJAX, at least in this format. There are ways that work and there are ways that don't, and unfortunately, this is a way that doesn't. So when we go to ask Google, well, how many pages do you know about in the DSLR category? The answer is 1. And the correct answer should be 2. Yep, we've got these other ones omitted. That's because they're blocked with query parameters for filtration and sort ordering, which is quite normal and the right thing to do, and that's all done in robots.txt. What's the upshot of this situation, though? Well, first of all, just as an aside, you don't appear to have meta descriptions of any significance on your category pages, so that's why we've just got sort of the first product listed there. That was a little bit sad, but that's not the problem. The problem is this. When I click to this rather funky, if not slightly high-end DSLR, thinking, yeah, I fancy myself as a photographer. I click through, here's the page, lovely page. There's the URL. Ask Google if it knows about that product, and it doesn't. So this is precisely the issue that I'm talking about if you don't let Google get to the second or beyond page in a sequence. Not everything will get indexed on many occasions. So And I did check that the canonical tag in that page matches that URL, and it does. So it's not that it's being canonicalized back to a different URL. That page simply is not in Google. And it wasn't the only one that I tested either. So there's a real issue there with the way that the AJAX is working. There are ways around that. I won't get into that today. But this is what I'm talking about with technical issues, particularly on e-commerce sites, stopping stuff get in. Fundamentally, you cannot get organic traffic for a page that Google doesn't know about. So unfortunately, in this case, Jigsaw24 will never show up for that particular camera until that page gets indexed. Another thing which I think is particularly pertinent to the way that e-commerce sites are typically built is this chap here, another colleague of Danny and Christian's. It's John Mueller, the public face of Google for webmasters on many occasions, now that Matt Cutts has gone over to work for the government. And he's saying here very clearly at a developer conference recently that Google devalues hidden text. And what we mean by hidden text is not the old school SEO of white text on a white background in a tiny font or anything like that. He's talking about content which is not immediately visible when the page loads. Things like click to read more, or in the classic e-commerce scenario, things like, and here we've got the juicy guys here somewhere, yep, down at the front. I'm not saying there's a particular issue with your site. This is just a classic e-commerce thing. You've got the nice presentation of the product page here, and when you scroll down, the information and other extra kind of stuff you might want on the page is laid out in tabs, including the specification up there. And it strikes me that the specification, because it is specific to that product and therefore unique in its own way, is probably something that should be displayed, because potentially specification is the kind of thing that somebody might be searching for an electric bike with. And if Google's devaluing the content of the specification text because it's hidden away in a tab like that, then that's not going to help the ranking. It's not to say you're being penalized or that Google's saying you're being naughty in doing this. They're just saying, well, you can't think that that information is terribly important if it's not immediately visible to the user, so we're going to devalue it.
Can I just ask a quick question?
Sure.
Is that the same for expanded divs?
It's the same for anything that's not immediately visible on the page when it loads, because Google renders the page. The old school crawling system and indexing was just raw HTML, line by line. Now Google both does that, and then it renders the page to see what it looks like, and that's how it knows when stuff appears or it doesn't. Now, I've not seen black and white evidence of somebody doing this and then changing it and it having a massive effect on their website. But what I'm doing is relaying to you a very clear message from Google. We devalue text when it is done in this way. So if you have pages laid out in that way, it's fine when you've got delivery information and terms and conditions, returns, all that kind of stuff hidden away, because it's on every page, it's always the same, and it's not the kind of thing that helps you rank. But if you've got unique product information that you can't immediately see on the page without clicking something, that's probably not the best way to do it. Just returning to the Denby site, because this did spot this when I was running through it too. Here we have a nice product page, and on the product page, a lot of the information is using what we call structured data markup. Now, this helps Google to understand which bit of the information on the page relates to what specific aspect. So it might be the price, it might be the description, it might be an image of the product. Google has a structured data testing tool to tell you if you're doing it right or if there are any errors. And the error that's showing up on the Denby site is that you're using the pound symbol in the price rather than in the markup using GBP, which is the accepted way of doing it. You might say, well, what does that matter? Especially when you look at the search results and Google is quite happily displaying the price that it's picked up from that structured data, which is exactly what you want and the whole purpose of doing that in the first place. Well, my answer is that that's working today, but we've had clients, and John might be aware of this because it's been penalizing one of his sites, where Google was flagging up in Search Console a warning, a manual penalty is going to be applied to your site if you don't sort out your structured data markup because it's not working correctly. So whilst you might be okay today with technically incorrect markup, and it might forever be okay, there's also the potential, and I've seen it with my own eyes, the potential that just making a mistake in the way you've used that could get the site penalized in some way, and that's obviously something to avoid. So if you're using structured data markup, make sure that you're compliant and use the data testing tool to ensure that that's the case. Something else which may affect you depending how you do marketing on your own site is that from January next year, Google is going to penalize sites, i.e. you're not going to rank as well on mobile if you have an interstitial popping up which blocks a large section of the page. So Google are very clear making the distinction here between the kind of pop-up boxes that get you to accept cookies or the app download banners that you get sometimes. Those are fine. It's when you've got something like this, which is obscuring the majority of the page, and you cannot use the page without dismissing that interstitial pop-up. If that happens on mobile, Google are going to start penalizing you from next January. So if you're using those kind of newsletter sign-up boxes or you're using these interstitials to give people discounts on their first visit or anything like that, then you may well want to consider how you do that, particularly on mobile going forwards. So I want to talk a little bit about what works and give you some examples of that in the real world. In terms of organic optimization for e-commerce sites specifically. Now this is, as you can tell, the RAC Shop website, or at least it was before they redesigned it earlier this year. And the reason I'm using this as an example is this collection of pages in the submenu there on the left-hand side. Quite a lot of those pages are informational. They're not sales pages. They're not there specifically to drive sales of any given product. They're there to provide additional information. So useful things like advice and how to fit a battery, slightly more esoteric things like a history of the car battery. Don't ask about that. We have a whole bunch of pages here, all on the topic of car batteries in some way. They're answering consumer questions, they're providing additional information on the topic, and the point of doing that is that, first of all, we're targeting a much broader collection of search terms by having a wider array of information on the site. So if you just have one page, however well optimized it is on car batteries, then you're only realistically going to rank for a handful of search queries in organic search because one page is only likely to do that. However, if we add another 8 pages of information around different aspects of car batteries, we start to pick up traffic from a much broader array of keywords. So we're expanding our reach for this site in the topic of car batteries. That's more organic traffic. The other interesting thing that happens is that the main page starts to rank better for the primary keywords, in this case, car batteries. And the reason for that is that Google sees a site with richer, deeper information on the subject as a better destination for the user. Google's mantra for many, many years now has been user experience. Do what's good for the user, you'll be rewarded in organic search. Kind of true in most cases. And what we're doing here is saying, okay, so there's like 8 or 10 or whatever pages on car batteries. There's another page on a competitor's website. It's really well optimized for the term car batteries, but they've only got that one page. So in a situation where both of those pages are equally relevant to the user, which does Google prefer? It prefers the one which is supported by another 7 or 8 pages of information on that topic, because it's more likely that the user will get the information they're seeking from something that's got 8 or 9 pages on the topic than a site that just has one page. And so this is what we call content hubs. It's a hub and spoke. The hub is the main category page that you want to rank for your core keywords. The spokes are all these supporting pages of information on that same topic. So how did that work out? Well, it brings traffic from medium and long tail keywords. We're reaching further in above the head terms, the real money makers. We're reaching into how to fit and stuff. And I can tell you from the data in here that those other pages do convert. It's not just a case of bringing traffic because somebody wants to know how to fit a car battery. They arrive on that page and they do make money out of those visitors arriving on that page. That greater depth of content means higher ranking for the core page as well. And there's a side benefit here as well, although you're probably doing this primarily for SEO. Giving users that extra information both helps them move through the sales funnel because you're answering their questions, you're removing the friction in terms of selling because they're not sure which is right for them or what a particular bit of terminology means, for example. You're helping them go through that sales process, and it gives a bit of extra trust. The sites that give the better quality information are more likely to be viewed by consumers as the ones that they trust to buy from. So, and of course, that helps you in every respect, not just organic traffic, but any way that you're getting those visitors to the website. So there's a number of reasons why this is a highly beneficial strategy. As you can see from this chart, unsurprisingly, car batteries are very seasonal. When it gets cold, car batteries die. That's why winter is a good time for the RAC. And what we see here is going from 2014 into 2015 peaks, and you see it continues to go up. Yeah, it drops after the peak, but the traffic is still higher. 66% more traffic 2015 to 2014 as a result of implementing that content hub. That's another 38% of organic revenue for them. Obviously, we've got the big bounce in 2015, but it continues to grow into 2016, and the organic revenue is getting even better as well. And we can see that their traffic from a variety of, their rankings from a variety of different car battery keywords is going up. So they moved from the lower reaches of the first page into the top 3, and at some point they were into the top 2 positions for car batteries, which is obviously worth a fair bit of money to them. There is, however, a downside to this tale. They changed their website earlier this year. Now, they kind of moved some of the hub stuff around. So not all of those pages are directly linked from the main car batteries page anymore. And since then, and because as a business, the RAC, which is owned by venture capitalists, have decided to change their business model as far as their shop is concerned, we haven't really done any useful SEO work on that site for some months. We've been in hiatus while they've been sorting themselves out, in effect. And that has slipped. They're now towards the bottom of the first page again for car batteries. That's a competitive area. The speed with which they've dropped reflects the fact that it's a competitive area. But it's interesting to see that happening. People often say to us, oh, well, I'm up there now. I don't need to do SEO anymore. That couldn't be further from the truth. If you stop doing it, you will lose traffic and you will lose rankings. The speed with which you do depends on the competition and how much that market is worth to people. But here I can give you a very clear evidence. They have lost traffic as a result of not doing anything and, to some extent, changing their site to not use that hub structure. Now, the other thing that, of course, is essential when it comes to successful SEO is to get links to your site. I'm sure I'm not telling anybody anything they don't know in this room with regards to that. This is essential for building your domain authority. It makes effectively Google is using links as a proxy for trust and authority and what users think of a website. The more links you have, effectively, the more votes, if you like, of confidence you have, albeit some of those links are worth far more than others, and indeed some of those links are actually viewed negatively and will get you penalised if you have too many of them. That's a topic for another day. But what we need to any website is links to build the authority. And of course, with e-commerce sites, that's quite hard, because if you're a retailer of stuff that other people sell as well, getting anybody out there in the big wide world web to be particularly interested in your website so that they link to it is quite tricky, because there's not necessarily that much different about what you're doing to what other retailers are doing with those things. So you need to find ways to get people to link to your site. And this is where content marketing comes in. We're creating content with the express purpose of getting other people to link back to it, obviously, once we've managed to tell them that it's there. So it builds domain authority. We can use where those links come into the site to then funnel that link equity further into the site. The reality is you are very infrequently going to get anybody linking to your product or category pages, because, frankly, why would anybody do that? So you need to find a way of funneling the value of the links that you get to the pages where those links appear into the rest of the website, and we can do that with content. The content is going out into the world with your brand on it, so it's increasing your reach in that sense as well. And you can use this content for other things. It's stuff to put out on social media. It's things you can put into email marketing. And sometimes the content itself starts to rank for terms and you're bringing in additional organic traffic. So I'm going to give you some examples here. This is a classic bog standard infographic, a long form image inserted typically into a blog post or some other page on the website. It's nicely presented, visualized information. This is a site called Restaurant Choice. They sell restaurant vouchers for gifts and corporate stuff. And we did this piece, Dining Etiquette Around the World, it's quite a long time ago now. So far, that's got 148 links. 20 odd of those have got a domain authority of over 60. It's been featured as one of the best infographics of 2014. It's been featured on, we just this week found it featured on another agency's website as a good example of content. It's done the job, and it was a simple thing to do. Another site here, Appliance City, kitchen appliance retailers. We did a piece earlier in the year, I think, on whether chocolate bars are shrinking. and we used actually Google surveys to run a quick survey across 500 people in the US and 500 people in the UK to see whether they think their chocolate bars have been shrinking, and then we compared that to obviously whether that was true or not. That's picked up about 20 links or so, but it's been featured on the Metro, it's been featured on the Mirror. The Metro, they kind of broke it up into separate little bits about each different chocolate bar. Sometimes the media want us to represent the information and stuff, but that's fine, it gets us the link. And this is what I mean about increasing the brand reach as well as getting the links, and of course these are very high domain authority websites, so this is really where you want to get the links from if you possibly can. So those infographics can work well. They're not necessarily hugely time-consuming or expensive to do. And something else which I think is typical for retailers is that you have an opportunity to use pop culture stuff. You have an opportunity to use the sort of wider media and culture of our country and our world to do stuff which, for example, a heavy industry, business-to-business kind of website wouldn't be able to do because it just wouldn't be suitable for them. But because you're dealing with consumers and essentially mass market, then you have the opportunity to utilize that to your advantage, and it makes it easier to get people interested in linking back to your site. So here's a piece we did in the style, as I'm sure you can recognize, in the style of the IKEA self-constructing furniture guides that you get from IKEA. We did a hard-to-eat foods guide for another appliance retailer. And as you can see, it's been featured on sites like Lifehacker. It's got domain authority of 93. It's been on Shortlist, domain authority 62. This is what I mean about pop culture. If you can resonate with what people understand or a common experience for people, then you're going to have a much easier time of getting them interested and linking back to your stuff. It's much easier to get into big media. And Dan at the back will recognize this one. We did for Superfy a piece on Star Wars bands, basically mashed up popular albums with Star Wars characters to create things like Obi-Wan Direction, the Rolling Clones, all this kind of stuff. Did the graphics obviously to match that, and that was extremely popular. So it's had 96 links so far, lots of very high domain authority sites, and in all of these cases, they are the gift that keeps on giving. So even after we've done this, we've promoted it and we've moved on to the next thing, the next month, a couple of months later, we'll pick up some more links. The Restaurant Choice one is still picking up links today, and we did it over 2 years ago. So I suppose another piece about this is that this is not a one-hit wonder. This is stuff which is pretty much evergreen if you get the right ideas, and it will continue to bring benefits to your site. What do you need for it? Well, you need a blog, really. If you don't have a blog on your website, it's very difficult to find a home for this kind of content. So certainly for us as an agency, if we're going to be doing this with people, we insist that they get a blog on their website, preferably WordPress integrated, so it's a /blog kind of scenario. You need a creativity and an understanding of purpose. So another challenge here is, why would an appliance retailer want to talk about the size of chocolate bars? Well, the answer is because it's something that we can use to get links, but also there is a food relationship between kitchens, appliances, food, recipes, chocolate bars. That's the relationship. You sometimes have to accept the lateral nature of coming up with ideas that will work, because if you're too restrictive, if you're too focused on product or doing this to make sales or whatever, it will fail. And I can give you examples of that as well, but I'm not going to. But certainly when we're restricted in our creativity and how lateral we can be with stuff, it makes life a lot harder. You need to be able to do research. You need to be able to find out whether anybody else has already done this and not repeat it, because that won't get you very far. And you need to be able to dig out the information and validate that, because if you put stuff out in your name, or if we as an agency were to put that out in somebody's name, it needs to be correct. Otherwise, it will be shot down in flames in seconds on the internet and you become a laughingstock on Reddit. Nobody wants that. You need good production values. I've seen some terrible infographics. There are whole sites dedicated to terrible infographics. You do not want your stuff appearing on those. And you need outreach skills, because for all the creativity and production skills you have, 50% of the job is getting this in front of people. And if it doesn't reach the right audience, it's not going to get the links. Doesn't matter how fantastic it looks on your website. People do not just discover this stuff. You have to tell them that it's there. And that is a tedious, boring, and frankly, thankless task in some cases. It's cold sales. It's like PR, except you have to make new friends every single time you do it instead of building up a contact book you can come back to. It's bloody hard, but it's essential. So if you tie all these things together, and here's a story of Ship It Appliances that we work with. We've done technical SEO. They had some really crappy blog posts that somebody thought was a good idea for SEO. They had to go or be consolidated. They hadn't really optimized their pages for sensible keywords, so we did the research. Then we optimized the pages. Then we started building up additional content because they hadn't written anything on any of their category pages, which made them very thin. And then we started to create some content hubs once we got over all of those barriers. And this is the kind of thing that happens. So we've only been working on this site since the start of the year. And so far, year on year, they're 40% up on organic traffic, they're 54% up on organic revenue, and those figures, month on month, are looking better and better as we go forwards. My point here is, it's not necessarily one thing. There is, unless you've got a real technical issue like the infinite scroll thing, there is very rarely one silver bullet that makes your organic traffic significantly increase. It's about doing all of the things correct and doing them all and consistently doing them and keeping adding more and keeping adding more, and you get the incremental gains. And I don't have the chart here, but you can see that they don't have a massive bounce on the first couple of months, but then it grows and it grows. And the gap between last year and this gets bigger and bigger as you go forwards. It is an incremental gains game, SEO. What about PPC then? Well, I'm not actually going to talk to you about Bing ads at all, and that's not because Google are here. It's just because, frankly, with about 5% market share, there's very little point in wasting your time. What I want to talk to you about are things that particularly affect retailers in PPC, and that really means shopping ads. Hands up if you're using shopping ads for your website. That's most of you, okay. So most of you are familiar with them. I saw as users, you're all familiar with them. Danny was giving a little example of them before with the running shoes. One thing that we've noticed, this is a quick tip, this thing here is called campaign priority. This only applies to shopping ads. You don't get campaign priority on any other kind of ads. Be careful how you use that. This chart shows what happened when we changed the priority from low to medium. Essentially, we had two campaigns, something called a catch-all, which I'll explain a little bit about in a minute, followed by a bunch of other campaigns for certain products by brand or by type. And the catch-all was set to medium priority, and for some reason, we found this one set to low priority. This campaign was bidding 65p against a 9p bid in the catch-all campaign. But because of the priority settings, the catch-all was winning. But because it was bidding 9p, we weren't getting the impressions because we were bidding much lower than the competition. We need to be bid 60 odd p, but because the priorities were set wrong, that hurt us. Those priorities, though, are your friend in other scenarios, as I will explain later. Okay, so do beware of your shopping campaign priorities. And do have a catch-all campaign. I'm surprised by the number of retail ad accounts I come across that don't have a catch-all. So this is where you have absolutely everything in your feed, all dumped into one single ad group with one single bid, typically very low, otherwise there's not much point in doing this. And so it'll be usually less than 10p, it might be a few pence. You set the campaign priority to low for the reasons I've just explained. And the point of doing this is that if you've got any shopping campaigns which are not getting 100% impression share, because they're limited by budget typically, then when that runs out of budget or when Google doesn't show your ads because it's spreading your impression share across the day due to the reduction in budget, then you might get some cheap clicks for the same products coming out of your catch-all campaign. And this is why in many accounts we see the catch-all campaign being by far and away the highest return on investment, typically between 8,000 and 20,000% return on ad spend. So typically the catch-all will generate a huge return on investment. You can't run your entire campaigns like that because you won't be bidding high enough to get the majority of impression share, but you can pick up a lot of cheap traffic, typically for very specific searches from these campaigns. It also is the way to go if you're selectively advertising things in your feed. So you don't want to pay large sums of money to advertise everything on your site, maybe because you've got some very low value products that you can't get a return on investment. Well, at 1p a click, you could probably get a return on investment on most things in your feed. So the catch-all is a way to easily run that as well. What we found as well with catch-alls is sometimes you see products more popular than you expected, or you get a lot of impressions at a surprisingly low cost per click, and you realize that that's something that warrants its own campaign and a little bit more focus. So the catch-all is also a way to just get some very cheap data coming through that help you identify things to improve your other campaigns. Now, Danny mentioned remarketing lists for search before. You can use those on shopping ads, and what we can see here is these things are bid adjustments. So essentially the way this works is, if somebody's been to your website already, and then they go back to Google and search, when your ads appear, if Google knows that those are people who've already been to your site, you can say through the settings here, I am willing to pay more for clicks from that person because they are already familiar with my site and with my products. And of course, the benefit of that is that you can increase your chances of conversion, you can increase your chances of getting those visitors back to your site, because the higher bid through this modifier means that your ad's going to rank higher or more likely to show in the shopping ads, in this case. Some data around that. Well, typically click-through rates are many times higher, like seriously many times higher. So some of our accounts are showing a click-through rate of 9.7% against an average of 1.9 for the same campaigns. So we're getting a lot more click-through rate because we're advertising to people who already know us. Yes, the cost per click goes up because you've said, I want to increase by a certain percentage, but the conversion rate more than doubles on average. And that means that your cost per acquisition, even though you're paying more for each click, the cost per sale or per acquisition is a lot lower using this method. Also worth bearing in mind that you can use this same technology not just with remarketing lists built up by visits to your site, but if you have a mailing list, as Danny also mentioned, you can upload your mailing list, your email addresses, into a customer match list, and you can modify your bids on that as well. So some of the stats Danny had around how much more your existing customers spend and how many more sales you make to existing customers during the festive period particularly is a very interesting thing here, because you can advertise to them on Google and make sure that you're in front of those people by using customer match and bid modifiers in the remarketing list for shopping. You might also exclude some recent purchases. It depends what you sell. So if you sell the kind of stuff where people buy it on a regular basis, the last thing you want to do is exclude people who've bought recently. If you sell something that is a once in a 5 or 10 year period kind of purchase, yeah, you probably don't want to advertise to people who've bought from you and then come back searching for the same thing, because they're probably looking for instructions or warranties or something like that, so you don't want to pay for that traffic. Now, this is a Coffee Tasting Club site. You'll learn a lot more about that in the near future. This is an example that I want to give you in terms of feed rules. So to run these shopping ads, you have to have a Google Merchant Center feed. It's basically a big bunch of data about every product that is sold on your website. And typically, that data is exactly what you see on the page when you view a product. So in this case, the product title in our Merchant Center feed is exactly the same as the name of the product that you see on the web page. Now, this is a coffee, but as you can tell, apart from the word espresso, it's not immediately obvious what that is. It doesn't say if it's coffee, it doesn't say if it's beans or ground or anything like that. It's just the brand name of this particular coffee. Now, Google have introduced in Merchant Center something called feed rules. Feed rules allow you to manipulate those fields of data and turn them into something else. So what we've done with this particular feed rule is take the title of the product and add the words ground or whole bean coffee onto the end of every product title of coffee products in the feed, because every coffee on the site is available as either ground or whole bean. And the interesting thing with that, as you can see here, this is what it makes the title. It's the same title, except it now says ground or whole bean on the end of it. We've seen an 81% increase in impressions since then, and sales have doubled. So simply optimizing our product titles so that it shows up for more searches, it's more relevant to a wider range of people when searching, has led to a lot more traffic and more sales as a result. So that feed manipulation or feed optimization is really critical in making your shopping campaigns work as good as they can. Another tip, don't forget your search term reports. This is something I see all the time with shopping campaigns. Because they don't work based on keywords, people forget that they're triggered by keywords. I don't know why, it's really obvious that they are, but people kind of forget that they ultimately work in the same way. It's just that you don't define the keywords, you just provide a supply of the product information through Merchant Center. But people are searching with words. The search term report, if you click on into a shopping campaign, you click on the keywords tab, you click on the search terms button here, you'll get the list of search terms. Or at least you'll get some of the search terms, because Google doesn't like to give you everything, does it, Danny? That'd be too easy. So you'll see some of the search terms which are causing people to click on those products. Sometimes they're not the greatest keywords in the world in terms of relevancy to that product. You might not want your products to show for some of those search terms. So you can add in negatives. The amount of shopping campaigns I've seen with no negative keywords is frankly stunning. But it's a huge waste if you don't use this to your advantage. So you can use them to add negative keywords, obviously, but you'll also find some opportunities in here. One particular example is we found a keyword that cropped up several times in a search term report from a shopping campaign, and we weren't using it to generate search ads. It was only something that would show up a product ad. So we took that keyword, we built a campaign for normal text ads, normal search ads, and that's generated $7,000 in 3 months with a return on ad spend of 13 to 1. And that's just because we looked at the search term report from a shopping campaign and it led us down that route. So it's not just about suppressing bad stuff, it's about finding good stuff as well when you look through these reports. Something else you might want to consider, and this is where you need to get a little bit more into how AdWords is set up, you might want to look at single product ad groups. Because the big issue for me with the way that shopping works, and I've asked the guys at Google this more than once, and it's not going to happen apparently, the big issue is you can't use a positive keyword in a shopping campaign. So I can't say only show my products if a particular brand name is used. So I only want coffee to show up that we sell, but if somebody Googles coffee, then our ads might show up. I don't really want that, it's too generic, I'm probably not going to make a return on investment on that ad, but I can stop it with a negative, but I can't say only show my ads if somebody types in Clemson coffee or 200 degrees or whatever it is. So the way to handle that is to separate out your products and start using negative keywords across those 2 different ad groups or 2 different campaigns so that your ads only show up for the keywords that you want. And this is something where, let's say you have a product available in a range of multiple sizes, but Google, for whatever reason, is showing a certain product against a certain size keyword, but it's the wrong one. The easiest way to do that is separate those 2 products into their own categories, their own ad groups, and negative keyword the opposite version in either ad group so that Google cannot show the wrong product for the wrong size in that particular example. And that's a way to really improve the efficiency. It's a bit tedious and time consuming and it makes management a bit more of a pain in the backside, but it is a way to get better performance from these. The same thing can be said of brand versus generic search. So it might not be the case that you don't want to show ads for the keyword coffee, but somebody searching coffee might convert at a fifth, let's say, of somebody who's searching with a brand term. So we can use negative keywords. We still advertise on coffee, but we actually run the same ads, or rather the same products in 2 different ad groups, but with different sets of negative keywords and different bids. So I put a load of negatives for generic terms in one ad group, and I'm willing to bid high on that because that means that those ads only show up when somebody's typing in something very specific or brand related. They're worth a lot to me, so I'll bid high. Somebody searching for a generic term can't see that ad because I've got negative keywords against the generic keywords. They'll then be displayed the ad from the group where I'm bidding 1/5 of what I'm bidding elsewhere, and there I'm still getting the visibility, still getting the clicks, but at 1/5 of the cost. And that's something that sometimes you just have to do with shopping ads because of the way that the keywords work. Okay, something else that's relatively new to Google is these things called price extensions. These only appear on mobile and only if you're in top position with your mobile ad, but they allow you to set a price from. So these are great for category level keywords or maybe products with options and you want to show people what the price starts at for those particular categories or options. And that's definitely the way to go, I think, with category level keywords, but unfortunately only on mobile at the moment. One example from an account we've been running here, the price extensions don't always show up, and obviously you've got to be in top position for them to show at all. But what we are seeing is that when you have the price extensions, your click-through rate is more than double, and the conversion rate is notably higher as well. Small numbers at the moment because they're quite new to us, but interesting to note that. So if you're not already using price extensions on mobile, you might well want to look into that.